introducing a really fan, principal machine learning engineer at Roblox.
And we also want to thank Shubham Gupta, staff support engineer 6 years ago.
Okay, so let's start with discussing a little bit about campaign performance and optimization. And I want to start with B. So the first question is, what are the key metrics that should define campaign success in retail media, like ROAS, or ROI, incrementality, or something else?
Yeah, I think that will be a very broad question. Actually, for the campaign objective, there are a bunch of objectives depends on advertisers. Usually we define from upper funnel and lower funnel. Like for the upper funnel, we can define it as awareness or the clicks. So awareness is more related to the impressions. For the lower level metrics like orders, conversions, conversion values, or some customized defined conversion values. And responding to that, you can define that as ROAS, CPA, or those kind of metrics.
Great.
From my point of view, I think it's depending upon what are your objectives are. So after all, like if direct sales is one of the objectives, ROS and ROI is one of the biggest factors that you want to do, right? And if your direct sales, as I mentioned, is one of the reasons, and if your other things could be like customer acquisition, right? What do you do for new consumers? You want to bring more consumers to brand awareness, these kind of things. Then customer acquisition cost comes in play, incrementally comes in play, right? At the same time, e-commerce, one of the biggest factors that means a lot is the conversion rate. Because we don't want clicks, we want people to actually buy those items and eventually check out. So yeah, depends upon what is the objective of the system is and objective of the advertiser is. But on a ballpark point of view, see, your conversion rate is one of the biggest factors that we want to consider.
Yeah, well, their answers were pretty comprehensive, but one point that I could add further here is, from our perspective, is that a lot of the times the advertisers have a pretty well-defined budget and they want to spend their budget as a whole. So budget utilization is also a key metric that many advertisers are looking, in addition to one mentioned by our panelists. So yeah, I think that covers a great variety of the metric that we see in different verticals. You know, as a Topsort, we have variety of clients from all different verticals, and as they were saying, the objective of the advertiser can be different in terms of exposure, conversions, and as Topsort, we try to give support to all of those different objectives, both in listings or banners.
And also, speaking of these metrics that you guys were just talking about, you know, like some of them might be great indicators of like the short-term performance, but how do you kind of like balance these short-term performance metrics with longer-term brand building metrics, or like something that will be seen over the lifetime of the customer?
Yeah, I can take this one. So I will say all the metrics we mentioned above are almost all short-term metrics. Long-term metrics usually related to like new customers bringing to the platform, and also like long-term customer life values. So for those, I would suggest, if possible, do some long-term reward models instead of just focusing on CPC, ROAS, CPA, those metrics, and look at the platform overall performance, build a accurate such long-term reward model. Then when you are doing A/B tests, or when you are evaluating your models, combine the long-term model together with your short-term objective. Then from there, you can have a more comprehensive understanding about the model performance from both short-term and long-term.
As mentioned, like all previous metrics were like short-term, and long-term, yes, you can like play like something with customer acquisition, right? You can do a kind of game theory kind of thing where you can ask them to come in again and again to place some different orders, and you give kind of revenues to them, which acts as like a part of your customer acquisition cost eventually. So these are the different things that you can eventually do.
Yes, I agree completely with their answers, and I think going to a little bit of a higher level, something that Patty mentioned previously is that there is a sort of triangle that you need to maintain balance, where you have the marketplace caring for revenue, then you have the sellers caring for conversions, for instance, or exposure, and then you have the people who buy the products or that receive the ads. So if you look at the short term, for instance, when you start rolling out ads, you may want to turn the balance towards one side. For instance, if you want to increase the adoption, you may want to give really good performance at the beginning to the initial vendors. And after that, you need to keep this balance in the triangle. So one of the points that I think is also worth adding to the discussion is, again, quoting Adam, their ads are, sponsored, but you can think of organic as also some sort of ad, and you need to keep care of the economy in the sense that when you place an ad, you displace an organic result. So what you want to measure in the long term is that what you're losing from displacement of the organic is offset by what you gain from the ads, like the ad revenue plus the sales of the products from the ad. So that is a little bit more of a long-term metric that you want to keep an eye on and not hurt, because it is related to like long-term profitability of the marketplace.
Great, so let's maybe dive into a little bit more on the technical side of things, and I wanted to talk a little bit about optimization techniques that you guys use. So maybe at a high level, so that we don't go into anything like confidential or anything. What optimization approaches are usually most effective for retail media campaigns? Like, for example, rule-based heuristics, machine learning models, automated bidding platforms, a combination of everything.
Yeah, so I will try to answer this as high level as possible. So usually I would say industry will start with some heuristic-based or rule-based models, but there's also limitations on that. Usually rule-based model is easy to explain to the advertisers, but that will usually have a very limited flexibility to adjust the optimization with respect to specific users, specific advertisers. So definitely want to add more granularity into the optimization. Then once adding more and more granularity, it will make the rule-based model less and less flexible and really hard to maintain, especially for the programmatic optimization. Then I think industry is trending to use some ML-based models. It's less expandable, but it's doing a good job, I think, as long as many companies are using those techniques. I think a very hot trend for the optimization is using reinforcement learning algorithms or reinforcement learning techniques. That is, and also some online learnings like multi-unbounded algorithms, those kind of things. However, those things, I would say it's more risky. First thing is, it's fully, to advertisers, it's like a black box. No one can explain why for a specific auction, why the system is submitting such a bid. And it will make the sales team and all the product team really hard to explain if something goes wrong. Another thing is, because these all optimization, especially the optimization, is too close to advertisers, if the system is spending the budget too fast suddenly, so it will need the maintenance team, engineering team, on-call team to react really fast. So it's still some limitations by fully applying reinforcement learning algorithm or MAB algorithm. So controller will be a really important thing to add into that. So that's basically all the techniques I think industries and teams are using now.
I don't know of it, so rule-based heuristics are easy to explain, as mentioned, right? And it works better in the scenarios when you don't have enough data set. So even if you want to build an ML model, those rule-based heuristic models can help you gather the data that you want to do. And at the end of the day, also, you want to do some hypothesis. You want to build an ML model for the very beginning, right? You want to test that hypothesis and these kind of things, okay, this kind of foods this works or not, right? Once you have those hypotheses very and like do A/B test to figure out, okay, like these kind of foods works fine. Once you've collected the data, then yes, you can build an ML model on top of it. Eventually, like, okay, and the long term that you can initially had an explainability on it, like why this model, this data has to be done this way. And once your brands and your advertisers have more confidence in it, like what are the rules that we using it, then we'll use that data to eventually build an ML model to have much more reality on it, like to understanding of what eventually might be built out of it.
Yeah, something that we can add from the Topsort perspective. We have definitely tried both classical ML approaches, PID controllers, for sometimes different parts of the system. So for instance, if you want to keep the budget in line, you may go for a controller. If you want to do estimation of conversion rates for the products in the campaigns, you may want to go the ML route. And I think there should be some care for having guardrails, because sometimes, as they were saying, the ML models can be a little bit hard to explain. So if you come to an advertiser with a CPC, the ML black box predicted that's really high, and you need to give an explanation to the advertiser why is this happening, you can get a little bit of in a pickle. So having heuristic guardrails can prevent those sticky situations. And another point is we have worked with a wide class of different marketplaces, and that includes different sizes, for instance. So if you're working with a B2B marketplace, it can have very sparse data. So trying to fit a very complex model with very sparse data, it's not going to necessarily yield good results. So sometimes you have to stick to heuristics or even classical statistics to make predictions that are solid enough for the amount of data that you have.
The last point is a great segue to the next question, which is how do you deal with sparse data challenges? Like especially for new products, or low volume SKUs, long tail brands, and so on, which I think is like fairly classical in this space.
I can try to answer first. So for those kind of products, I would say even though we don't have like too much data about those, but we still have like a basic understanding about those. We can start from like non-numerical based methodology, try to understand the basic background of this item or this new SKU. You know the title, the image, the description of those. You can already have some understanding of that. Then based on that, you can try to find a match between your targeting item with or your targeting SKU with other brands, and start from that. There, do some cold start algorithm and gradually ramp up the item.
Yeah. So once you have like the basic information, like you can apply some kind of exploit methods, like multi-hop data, these kind of things, to understand like in which scenarios these works, you can exploit the situations, you can explore more things and validate data eventually using those mechanisms.
Yeah, absolutely agree with the answers. I think, again, going back to a little bit of a higher level, what you want to do is you want to extrapolate data. So if you have a new product, this product may not have behavioral data, but it will certainly have some metadata. It comes with entries in a catalog, for instance. And this data can be used to infer behavioral data. So for instance, CTR, CPR, by looking at the behavioral data of similar items. These days you can use all sorts of models, and one that we have been liking recently is using the structured output of LLMs to give an example. So you can have a big list of products and ask the LLM to classify in certain bins or different categories that can do a lot of the manual work that we used to do and in these big data sets of new products to try to do the inference. Yeah, LLMs have been really good aid in that sense recently.
And so once your models are already built and giving you results, how do you usually ensure that these, like the results aren't biased or they're like robust against any kind of bias, like positioning bias, seasonality, stockouts, and so on? Yeah, anyone?
Yeah, I can start first. So I think that usually those biases are already considered in the model itself. So when we are building those models, we will think about those biases and see how we can be biased accordingly. There are several techniques and papers talking about each of them. Yeah. And after develop and deploy the model from A/B test, you can also observe the performance. And even after the launch, you can also monitor the performance and see if it is performing well or performing poorly into specific scenario.
You can some kind of like eventually on the ML model that you have built, you have some heuristic guardrails on top of it. Right? That would be one of the best formats to do it. Like, okay, like ML can say like, okay, show all on the whole page, show we have 50 results, show all 50 results as an ads. Right? So you can have some kind of guardrails on top of it, like some rule-based guardrails on top of it to understand like those kind of biases it doesn't have there. You can have category limits, you can have certain limits to brands, so not certain brands are being like, because it could happen like all the particular brands are getting higher CPC. Right? So all you can see, okay, so a particular brand is all the top 50 results from your system. So these kind of guardrails you can have in place.
Yes, I absolutely agree with the guardrails, because even if you can identify bias, you may still want to put the guardrail in case you were not able to completely remove the bias from the data set. It will protect you, so if it shows up, it will protect you against this bias, so you will obtain results that are within what you're expecting to deliver.
Okay, so I have only just like one more question left for this section of the panel. So, and this has to do with the future. The question is, how is AI, specifically generative models for reinforcement learning, shaping the future of campaign and bid optimization in retail media?
I would say as those methodologies are going more advanced, definitely optimization is about squeezing the last juice from the platform. So in order to achieve that, definitely optimize at a much granular level is of course better than optimize at a higher level. So I think the reinforcement learning and also ML models, those are give us the flexibility and also capability to do all those optimization in real time. So in the end, if those models are safe and trustable, in the end, I think the reinforcement learning will do a good job and give us real-time optimization.
I think this current model actually moving to an agentic model, right? So we can have multi-agentic models where you have an agent for retailer, you have an agent for seller, you have an agent for advertiser, that's it, buyer, right? So at that point, as you mentioned, like in the initial, like it depends on at what stage of the campaign are you short term or long term. Your multi-agents will decide to go for to be more inclined towards retailer, or to be more inclined towards advertiser, or to be more inclined towards revenue. And these can eventually learn like, okay, what moment of the campaign I'm in, and use those kind of biasness, or I won't say biasness, but weights or these kind of things to identify, okay, you need at this moment of time, this is more important.
Yes, particularly something that I'm particularly excited is related to what Stripe is doing, where they were using these new models to basically think of the events of transactions as having some sort of language structure, having its own semantic. I think this is an idea that is very powerful and it can be exploited in many other contexts, including e-commerce and retail media. I think that's going to yield really good results because adoption time, or when you get a click, any of those instances, impression time, you are going to be able to decipher the semantic of this event. So in that sense, it's going to give you really strong information that's going to help you make a decision. How much should you bid? Should you participate in this auction? Should you display the impression? I think those models are going to prove very useful in the near future.
Great, thank you for that. Now moving to the second section of this panel, I want to talk a bit about ad load, meaning how we show the ads to the users. As it was mentioned before in this panel, showing one ad usually displaces one organic result. So there's a bit of a trade-off between the ads we're showing and the things that the user would organically see. So how do we balance this? How do we balance the revenue we can generate with the user experience in a way that the user doesn't become overwhelmed? And how do you determine the optimal spot, the sweet spot for this balance? I'm not sure if someone wants to go first. I think Shubham, you will know a lot of this.
So I can answer more on this part. So when you talk about organic results, first we want to prioritize if we have ad with organic results, right? We want to make sure that our initial results are not hampered by just because we want to show an ad. Is it already part of the organic results or not? If not, how do I make sure that whatever I'm placing doesn't cannibalize my revenue, right? So on that basis, you can run different kind of A/B tests, right? What kind of ads will you replace?
Because you mentioned it right away, I think it's very interesting to talk about experimentation and A/B testing. In particular, usually we use A/B testing as a way to get a robust result. It's our golden standard, to get in causal effects. But we also have some problems when we take it to practice. There's sometimes a bit of a challenge of having the rigor of the perfect A/B test to the challenges of taking it to practice. And we find many different problems. So how have you handled that? How have you handled the difficulties of taking the A/B test to practice, of maintaining the A/B test, of being able to make the tests or the experimentations overall easier, more dynamic, easy to take forward, and just, as you were saying, Felipe, of making it faster and to iterate as fast as possible.
One of the biggest things to be quality recognition has to be very good, right? Making sure that there's no biasness when you like the A/B test, or it's not like you did an A/B test and now the results are not robust enough to depend on it, right? Different parameters that you run on A/B tests, like p-values and these kind of things, has to be make sure that it doesn't impact your GMVs and everything, right? It's not like you cannot depend on those results, but if you run the A/B test again tomorrow, results might be different. You don't want that at the same time. So yeah, so you would have to be more robust. Framework is definitely needed to make sure that experimentation is totally dependent on. And
yeah, I think from the practical point of view, I can say that related to introducing biases, it's very easy to introduce a bias without noticing. So I think it's very important to have a bunch of control metrics that will let you see if there is actually something wrong, like metrics that shouldn't be affected by the